Camp Production.
Northwestern Pennsylvania Beekeepers Association
Presents
Randy Oliver.
Updates, Pollen Substitutes.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. I imagine your weather's quite different there than it is here in California. We've already got our bees back out of almond pollination and have been madly making nukes. We've made over 1,000 nukes so far, another 2,000 to go. So we're actually dealing with preventing swarming already, and we're in full queen production. So much earlier season here. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Oh, you need to enable my screen sharing or co-host me or something so I can share my screen. What kind of weather have you guys got out there right now?
It is very dreary right now, but the bees are definitely out flying and pulling in pollen when it's not raining on them.
Okay. Oh, I know. Hey, I can understand that mic. The other mic was pretty rough. Okay, ready to try it again? No. You can also just click on me as a participant and say make host or make co-host. Or
Click on this picture, find his name.
okie doke. There we go.
I'm trying to figure out how to.
You got it. You should be up. Okay, let me click the key buttons right here. This is going from the beginning. And then I want to click another button here. Okay, get you over to here. Alrighty. Okay, let's get going here. We'll see how far we can get on this one. I picked out two different projects that I worked on last year to share the results of these. These are the ones that most people are interested in. So first, let's talk about the comparative trial of the pollen subs. And understand where I'm at and what's happening out here. That we grow 82% of the world's almonds here in California. And we have over 1 million acres of almond trees planted. And this is what it looks like in the Central Valley of California when the almond trees come into bloom. It's just amazing artificial forests of these trees all come to bloom at the same time. And for most of the cultivars, they're dependent upon bee pollination because they plant typically 3 different cultivars in an orchard in each row. And they're still incompatible, which means they can't fertilize themselves. So they need honeybees to transfer pollen from one row of trees to the next row of trees. Otherwise, they get a very, very small crop. Unfortunately, almonds grow where it's in the arid environments where there's not a whole lot of water. And that is us in California, especially these last few years. We're now in the worst drought in California, based upon sediment analysis. 1,200 years. So it's a very severe drought. And we've got very little rain this year. So we're still in this drought. And beekeeping has become very difficult in California due to that lack of forage. This is, typical summertime condition, just dry. Nothing comes from the trees, and there's nothing from here. So most California commercial beekeepers move their bees out of state during the summer to go to better forage. And I did that for 25 years, moving up to irrigated alfalfa in the state of Nevada for the summer. And then we learned that we could keep our bees at home, our hives at home, and then give them supplemental feeding late in the summer to get them to brood up before winter. And that would allow us to take strong colonies to almonds. We get paid by colony strength going to almonds. So the stronger our colonies, the more money we make. So we feed them in the fall, starting in September, to build them up for brood rearing. We get a couple of good rounds of brood, so we get our winter bees produced. And then when we move them down to almonds, it's very frustrating for us because the valley floor is actually slightly cooler than the foothills. Although we get snow, they don't get snow, but they do get cold air pools. So we actually typically get a bloom happening up in our area prior to that down in the valley. So this is right here. Almonds start blooming around Valentine's Day, around February 15th. This is a week before bloom right here. You can see there's not one thing blooming, not a single petal on the trees, virtually no weeds in bloom on the valley floor. Up where we live, there's a light nectar and pollen flow on, and our bees are building up really wonderfully on that. The growers want us to move our bees down before the trees start to bloom, so they know that they have hives there for the bloom. So we have to take our hives off of nectar and pollen flow and move them down to this bee desert right here where there's nothing whatsoever for them to eat. So when we do that, we'll give them a 2.5 pound chunk of pollen sub, which will last them, keep them rearing brood until these trees start to bloom about a week later. And then we get paid by how strong our colonies are when the bloom starts. So this is the bloom starting right here. It's more intense than this with time. So our question was for this trial is that some pollen subs promote growth better than others. So I did a study in 2013 comparing the subs on the market. And there's new subs on the market now, and I've been kind of thinking about running another trial. And then some beekeepers down in the Bakersfield area, southern, further south from me, commercial pollinators. They had developed a homebrew formulation of pollen sub, and they asked me if I could test it to compare it to the subs on the market. And I said, well, okay, they kicked in some money to help cover some of their costs. And so this is their homebrew formulation right here. And what I did then is I compared it to other subs on the market. So the formulation that I've been using for some years in our operation was the boba soft patties from Marin Lake. We like them because it comes in just a big box, 50 pounds of pollen sub, no wrappers or anything. And then we can take a sharp spade or knife and cut these up to whatever size patties we want relative to colony size or how much we want to feed them. Also, possibly advanced, these squish between the frames. I'll talk about that later. So then I went to the various companies and said, okay, give me your flagship product, in a fresh batch, mix up a fresh batch so I can compare it. So Global said their flagship product was one that has 15% natural pollen in this. So I tested the Global 15% pollen. They also have a 5% pollen one and a no pollen one. I tested only their flagship one. Dan has this new formulation, AP23, developed by animal nutritionists, and wanted to test that one. And then Megabee, built by Dr. Gordon Wardell, who worked at the USDA and now run by his son. This product's been in the market for some years. And then Man Lake's flagship product, Ultra Bee, which was different this year. It was darker than normal, and they had changed the yeast. So the yeast has been changed back now to the older version. So I'm not sure that this is now a test of their current version of Ultra Bee. Then there's a homebrew formulation the beekeepers make, and theirs has 20% natural pollen in it. So the only two formulations that had natural pollen in them were these two. The others are totally artificial dyes, no natural pollen. And then the last was the spirulina algae healthy patties, newly on the market. And I have worked with this company somewhat. There's a question about the amount of thyme oil that they put in this patty, which we found was somewhat repellent to the bees. They're now selling this also without the thyme oil. So take the results for this with a consideration that I tested the ones with the thyme oil, not without thyme oil. And then for, excuse me, I did run a positive control in this trial of straight natural pollen and sugar, because that was not the question we wanted to answer. We just wanted to compare all of these. But to remove the variable of the amount of sugar in these patties, we then fed a sham control or negative control patty of just sugar alone in a fondant, equal to the amount of sugar that the average amount of sugar in any of these patties. So you can see just the effect of sugar being alone. Now, it was a large trial, 144 colonies involved, 18 hives per patty type, 8 different patty types times 18 hives is 144. And then we wanted to replicate this in different yards just to see if we got consistent results. So we replicated in 3 different yards. As you can imagine, feeding 8 different types of pollen sub to 144 hives time and again without making any errors could be confusing. So what we did is before we went out each day feeding those 3 yards, we would count out our 18 patties and put them into color-coded tubs like this. And we didn't look at patty name at all, we just looked at the color on the tub. And then on the number on each hive, number marker, we put a piece of colored tape to match the color on the tub. So when we got to the yard, the first person would grab a tub and go out and match the colored tape. And we'd spread them all out. Then the quality control person would go out, double check to make sure every colony had a tub and everything was correct. And then we would open the hives and put them in. So we wouldn't make any mistakes of misfeeding one of the patties. This would it'd be very confusing out there in the field, as you can imagine. This is my son, Eric, by the way. Yes. Here's my 2 sons, Eric and Ian. We chose the 3 yards to run the trial in from experience that we knew that these 3 yards were like our 3 worst yards we could possibly take these in to the summer, where colonies would just go downhill in strength if we did not give them supplemental feed. So this would be typical right here. These oaks are well past bloom, and there's nothing else around here for them to eat. We fed them pollen sub and sugar syrup pretty much continuously all the way through the summer, and then starting again in late winter. And here's the timeline of the trial. And so our starting point was in mid-August. We roughly equalized the colonies, but graded them all for strength, and then assigned the treatments by colony strength. So a randomized block design, which means we took the 8 strongest colonies in a yard and then fed them, randomly assigned 8 treatments to them, and then to the next 8 strongest and assigned them. I wanted to see if there was any effect on starting colony size also. So we had a range, but they started at an average 8.5 frame strength across the board. Then what we did is, so here's the conditions outside. Total pollen dearth at this point. We thought there would be no more pollen coming in, and we got surprised several days after we started. We had 2 of the 3 yards, we got a yellow star thistle. Did this surprise bloom for about 10 days, and the colonies in those 2 yards stopped eating their pollen stuff. We stopped feeding it to them. See that here. And they brooded up big, and then immediately stopped brooding up once that flow was over. The 3rd yard did not get this, and we fed them throughout that time. So now we have this long dearth period here where there's almost nothing coming in. We fed pollen sub and syrup, showing the feeding of pollen subs in little orange squares, and the feeding of sugar syrup is in the blue circles. We did, at this point, by October, these colonies were getting plugged out with sugar syrup, honey, so no lack of carbohydrates. So as long as we saw open syrup or nectar cells near the brood nest, we did not feed sugar syrup at that point. If it looked like they were short of all open cells of nectar or syrup, we would feed them then. So we did a midpoint breathing here in November as they cut back on brood rearing and went into the winter cluster. We don't get as cold this year, but we still try to get a brief brood break. That year it was very, very warm winter, and we saw that by early December they were already thinking about brood again. So we started feeding them again. And then our first pollen float is alders, which starts in mid-January. So you can count one through like 21 days from when the alder flow started. And after that point, the outcome of the colony strength could have been affected by bees that were emerging from their suspended alder flow. So on day 20 after the alder flow started, we did a final grading so that the results were not influenced by the natural pollen flow here. We also we fed all the colonies equally and fed them ad libitum. That means that the colonies that had the most attractive subs, generally the ones with natural pollen, are eaten the most rapidly. When they were just about eaten, we would go ahead and feed everybody again. And they were all fed equally. We would pull out any uneaten sub and weigh that and kept track of that. But overall, the subs were at least 90% eaten by all colonies across the board. So the amount consumed did not appear to be a major factor here. Now, what was odd to us is that the previous year, 2019, in one of these yards, we had run a trial and we were able to make our colonies grow by feeding. In 2020, we were unable to make them grow in strength between August and November. Very, very disappointing. I was curious why. So what I did is I went back through weather history for this area and I plotted out the daily high temperatures in red and the daily humidity lows. So in 2020, when we ran this trial, that's solid lines here. And the previous year, when the colonies grew, are the dotted lines. And what you can see is in this, and when we normally are building our colonies up and feeding in September and October, the temperatures in the year that they grew were much, much lower. These were not stressed. We were having temperatures of 100 degrees in early October, really stressful for the bees. And then the humidity, if you look, their humidities were just super, super low during this period, where the previous year, the dotted, they were much higher, much easier for the colonies to root. So this temperature humidity thing seems to might have had something to do with a failure to rear. Okay, so then it was, this shows the amount of growth. So this would be how many times the strength compared to their starting at 1. So if they had doubled the size, it would get to 2x. None of them did that. So only these few colonies actually grew. The rest actually decreased in strength. And I was curious, based upon the colony starting strength, how much they grew on their for ending strength. We found out that actually the ones that started larger in August actually shrunk more than the ones that started smaller in August. So starting strength did not predict midpoint strength at all. And what's interesting on these graphs here, you can look at the colors, the different patty types here. And you can see the control colonies, the whites, they really shrunk a lot in strength. Also the healthy bee, the greens, you can see them shrinking a lot in strength. Whereas some of the red and blue group, the global and the home group, tended to appear not shrinking in strength so much. And actually of these, you see some of these actually shrunk very well. Okay, so this is showing in October. This is out of time. This frame right here showing that there's no pollen stored in late season around the brood at all. So they were totally dependent upon pollen sub for their protein source. Very unlike you guys, when you get that global rhubarb afterflow, that does not happen where we live, unfortunately. So here we are, midpoint breathing, with my new technician in training right here. This is my grandson, Ryder, who due to the pandemic was out of school, but a really bright kid, and he turned out to be a really good field technician, very accurately checking every hive to make sure we got it fed right, and graded right, recording the data. So up and coming new technician right here. So here we are doing clustered grading, where we tip take the top box off, tip it up, look in between the frames, count how many seams coverage with these, tip the bottom box up, look from the bottom, and count that, and get an overall cluster grading. And grading the lower box and upper box separately, which we'll return to later. So at midpoint, here's the results right now. And these are the same colors for these patties all throughout all these graphs here. So you can see, here's our average cluster size, and you see the sugar control patties had dropped from their starting 8.5 frame average down to less than 4 frames. So it did very, very poorly. Where the global home group had not dropped that much. So clearly went into winter in better strength here. Now, at this point, I was curious, could it have been the protein content of the subs? So here we have the subs ranked by protein content. These are in the lower 20s, and some of these down around 15%. But there wasn't a correlation. It's our two top performers. No correlation with the protein content. So that wasn't it. How about the fat content, the lipid content? So here's our two top performers for lipid content. And you can see one of them is the lowest fat content of all. So apparently it's not the lipid content that's important in the pollen cells. Then I compared the sugar content. We had these all analyzed for glucose, fructose, and also total sugars here, which would be the tall colored one. And the two top performing subs were just kind of right in the, close to the middle. And sugar was not a limiting factor because we were feeding these colonies. They were never short for honey or syrup at any time. So that sugar content did not have to do with it. Now, I collaborated with Dr. Fitzgerald from USDA and took samples of these from the colonies in November, workers from the brood nest, the younger bees there, the ones that would become winter bees. And he took them and dissected off the heads and thoraxes and then dried them and then weighed them to come up with the head and thorax mass. He also checked for vitellogen and other things too. And what I found was interesting is the correlation between head and thorax mass on this axis, how many milligrams for 15 bees, and the total frames of bees for all the hives in the test groups, which essentially says how will the pollen increase population, effective population size. And a very close correlation between head and thorax mass and total pollen strength. So that indicates that we can use head and thorax mass as a proxy for looking for the nutritional benefit to colony buildup from pollen subs. So it clearly shows that this was due to nutrition rather than something else because of this correlation. Now, what I was curious about was the core gut bacteria. We're feeding these colonies of bees very different diets. Two of them containing natural pollen, the rest not containing any pollen at all. And these are the core gut bacteria that all honeybees in the world always have in their guts. And the different colors show the community structure with whatever, 5 being the main one, and some of these other ones being smaller ones. And if you look at this, the community structure was the same no matter what we fed them. That was very much surprising me. But the total bacterial abundance, the number of bacterial plate-forming units where they plate them out in the petri dish, varied from very acid in order to keep them, the mites down in them, except for a few colonies scattered throughout, which were potential breeder colonies, which were keeping mice down by themselves. They're also simultaneously breeding for mite resistance. So we have, in all of our yards, we have colonies marked that did not need the treatment. They don't get treated. So when I sent those samples to Vince, I realized, hey, there were 8 of them out of the 81 I sent in that had never been exposed to oxalic acid. So I was curious whether this long-term slow-release oxalic acid would affect the gut microbiome. And as you can see, here's the oxalic acid treated, here's the non-treated, and there's no significant difference between the two. So that's a positive surprise finding in this one, that the feeding of oxalic acid does not appear to affect the gut microbiome. Or not feeding, but the treating of oxalic acid. Okay, so we let the bees go through their winter, and then we resumed feeding in mid-December. Here's one of the spirulina patties right here. And the colonies started building up. This is the first round of brood happening in late December, right here, and they're starting to build up for heading to almond pollination in early February. And then finally, February 1st, time for a final grading, which occurred on a really cool morning for us, so that these were in a tight cluster. So the colony strength was not, the cluster size was not huge, but it makes no difference because we're comparing relative to each other. So the absolute value of number of bees was not what we're going to have. It's going to be relative performance of these colonies. And Alice Dunbar, another helper, coming out to help us grade. She often asks the recorder. So here's one of the yards which was typical. Now there's a few colonies in every yard that failed for one reason or another, queens or whatever. So I would take the two, this year the one group had two that failed. So I removed the two weakest colonies out of each group. So out of the 9 hives in each group here, this is the ending best 7 out of those 9. And here you can see the performance from our starting strengths, averaging around 8.5 frames of these cluster size, dropping down to November, and then going back up to the 1st February, where some of them regained strength nicely. And at this point, these colonies are ready to explode. In another 2 weeks, they'd be way up here because they all have sealed brood in them at this point. And some did not do very well. The sugar control rates continued to decline in strength. So it shows a clear advantage to feeding pollen cells. Now here's the interesting thing. Here's the 2 with natural pollen. Look at this one. This is the both soft and no pollen, performing almost as well as those with natural pollen. So this has really got me thinking now that whether or not there actually is a benefit to the natural pollen or not, or whether it's something else. And we're going to be returning to that. Here's our percent colony loss out of each group of them. I removed any hives that had just simply gone cleanless, just looking to see which ones just went nosedive without queen failure. And you can see with the global, we didn't lose any of them. Where sugar control, we lost 30% of the colonies. They just moved to nothing, lack of protein coming in. So here's I graphed this out from the visual. I left this no change line here. You can see that now the change between the November strength and February strength, about half the colonies actually did grow in strength. Clear up to these, so they're growing back up to 12 framers up here, and about half of them went down in strength. But what you can do is tease out by looking at the colors of these dots. Look at the greens. Most all of the greens, the ones getting healthy bee, had decreased in strength. Most all of the reds, the home group, or the blues, the global, had increased in strength. So it's very, even though it's a lot of things to look at here, your eye can tease out that the different performance of these cells right here. So I chose one, just the home groups, to show a histogram of performance, because there's a lot of variation from colony to colony. So here's for all the 18 colonies, so this is number of colonies, shows that 2 of those 18 of the sugar control colonies ended up at a colony strength of about one frame of these. 3 of them were 2 frames. The average was right around 3 frames of these, very, very small. No way they could ever go to almonds. And then a normal curve, this is what we expect. Normally it's this nice normal curve. So this is what happens when we did not feed them pollen cell. These ones here are the homers. Notice that their normal curve is way over here with both a mean and a median value of over 8 frames in strength compared to 3 frames in strength here. So this really, by teasing out this way with the histogram, you can really tell. And a couple of come here, 2 of the and one of the colonies here was up to 12 frames strength right here. So you can really see the difference in performance. Okay. So then what I wanted to figure out is, well, how is it best to evaluate these? And from a commercial beekeeping standpoint, dollars in your pocket is the best way to evaluate it. We get paid about $25 per frame of bees. We go in a contract with the contracts where they actually grade it. We get about $25 a frame. So, well, tell you what, out of that group of 18 colonies for each test group, let me just add up all the frames and the frame strength into one number for the group, and that's what we would have gotten paid for. So for the home group, we were at about 135 frames of bees. So you can do the math, 135 frames of bees times $25 adds up to a lot of money in our pocket right here. Where for the sugar controls, we were down to less than 40 frames of bees. 3.5 times as many bees in the home brews as there were in the sugar controls. So clearly a huge difference in performance of the colonies. And this is after 7 months of being. Normally we don't do this being. We do a month and a half in the fall and maybe a couple of weeks in the springtime. But this one is showing, even with its additive and feeding, this big difference here. Okay, that's the trial. That's the results. Now the question is why? Why do some subs perform better than others? We're going to get to this principle of Liebig's barrel, talking about limiting nutrients. So let's just say that each of these staves of this barrel represented, this might be vitamin C, this might be the amount of protein you needed, or this would be an essential amino acid, or this would be the amount of calcium or iron. And if we balance them all to the optimum amount that you needed, all of the staves would be at the top. But if you're deficient in any single limiting nutrient, just like if you don't get any vitamin C in your diet, it doesn't make any difference how much protein or carbohydrate or fat or other vitamins you get, because that vitamin C is your limiting nutrient. And that's your lowest state. And that sets the level of how well the whole organism can perform based upon the limiting nutrient. It doesn't help to give you an abundance of anything else. It's so long as one nutrient is limited. And this is where we get to essential amino acids. Back in the 1950s, researchers started realizing that protein is not just protein, that's amino acids. And of those amino acids, 20 amino acids used in life forms to make all the proteins in your body. For different species, there's different numbers of them that are essential. So for honeybees, there are 10 essential amino acids. They are not able to make themselves. They have to get it from their diet. Other forms of livestock had started at the same time in the 1950s, looking at this for livestock diets. Nowadays, if you're growing chickens or pigs or anything else, you can buy a formulated diet which has the right essential amino acid ratio for every stage of growth. It changes over stage of growth. This is really well researched in every animal industry other than honeybees. Our state of knowledge comes from this paper right here from 1953. That is our state of knowledge on honeybee nutrition as far as essential amino acids from 1953. This is an 80-page paper, incredible work by Antonius de Groot in the Netherlands. And I have spent countless hours studying those 80 pages here, and that's what we're going to be talking about now. This one graph, this figure 15, is it. That's where we get all of our information on essential amino acids. And what he did here is he made an artificial, he took caged bees, freshly emerged bees from homes, put them in cages, and then fed them artificial diets made by custom mixing up purified essential amino acids to mimic casein, that's milk protein, which is a complete diet. And what he would do for each one of these essential amino acids, he, just like with Liebig's barrel, he would limit the amount of each one. So for baling here, he started out with 0, and this would be your weight of the bees after a few weeks of feeding, and almost no weight gain if you have 0 valine in the diet. If you put in 1%, you get more growth. 2%, so this is 3%, 4%, but above 4%, there's a tip point. No benefit of going over 4% valine in the diet. So then he said, okay, we'll set this ratio as 4. And then he normalized everything to tryptophan, which is the amino acid used in lowest amount. And this was in retrospect, probably a huge mistake for him to normalize to tryptophan. I'll show you why in a minute. So based upon tryptophan, which happened to be have the tip point at 1, oh, 1, that makes it really handy. So relative to tryptophan, which had the inflection point at 1, you should have 4 times as much valine as you have tryptophan. You should have twice as much phenylalanine as tryptophan. And that's where this ratio of essential amino acids came from. Just from looking at the tip points on these curves here in this one graph. That is it. That's our state of knowledge for essential amino acids. So now, he then said for the diet he tested and the percentages, that for minimal growth, you would need to have your other amino acids above this black column. So this is the tryptophan column here at 1%. So this would be at the 1% level. We had all these diets analyzed for essential amino acids. And you can see all of them, the rest of the amino acids were above the level of showing the growth ratio relative to tryptophan. So, oh wow, all these amino acids, none have any deficiencies. But that's only if you normalize to tryptophan. And that's kind of backwards. It looks to me like maybe we should normalize to one of these, the percent excess, especially leucine. The reason is if you look at the growth ratios right here, the main amino acid you need is leucine. It should be up here at 16% of the total amino acids. And this is the mistake that Will made, from my perspective, that he should have normalized everything to leucine. And here's 2 more of his graphs. Here's figure 5 here, I think, where he shows the increase in dry weight and increase in nitrogen content. That means actual, it's used in the beef's body for actually building the body parts. And notice so this is showing how they grow, and this is if you start depending back on any of the amino acids. The ones that most greatly reduce the weight gain were leucine, threonine, and valine. These were way more important than a shortage in any of these other amino acids. And over here, by nitrogen content, again, leucine, histidine, and threonine right here. So leucine and threonine seem to be much more important than tryptophan. And that was a mistake that I feel that the group made. So now I've normalized all those pollen subs to leucines. I set leucine at 1 now. And now I don't see this any deficiencies in amino acids. And so here's the dotted line across. Any that are below that bar, they indicate they're deficient in these amino acids. Look at the deficiencies now. Now we're seeing that those diets, that instead of looking like they had excesses, they actually were deficient in many of the amino acids, especially in valine and isoleucine across the board. And again, we look at these ones that are most limiting here. So here's the histidine, limiting, threonine, very limiting, and valine, very, very limiting here. So I took the time then to create a calculator that you could compare any formulation of diet in green to what the group suggested right here. So I looked at royal jelly. Well, the royal jelly looks pretty much the same, except for it's a little bit higher in lysine. That stands out right here. If I take a mix of nutritious natural pollens, look how closely they match the growth ratios right here. So these 2 right here tell me a lot. Look at what the ideal food of bees is, royal jelly, and a natural, nutritious natural pollen mix. These are telling us these don't have those kinds of deficiencies that we just saw back here. So then I compared it for all different ones. This is for global, bulk, soft, 80-23, roughly in order from the best performing down to the poorest performing. And I ranked the deficiencies by the size of the red dot here. The best performing had very few deficiencies, whereas the poorest performing had very large deficiencies across the board. This was absolutely eye-opening to me. So then I calculated out your total number of frames of bees for each treatment group, back to the 140 frames, relative to the sum of those deficiencies. I simply added up these deficiencies proportionally to the total diet here. So zero deficiencies would be right here, this arbitrary number of 3.5. But look at the correlation between the deficiencies and performance. This is an R-squared value of 0.85. That means 85% of the distribution of these performance can be accounted for or predicted by me calculating out the deficiencies of these amino acids. And I bet if this did not have the time on it, something would be right up here on this line. We'd have even a higher R-squared. In a field trial with anything with honeybees, to get an R-squared of 85% is like unheard of. This is extremely high level to predict colony performance from anything. So this looks pretty solid. The probability of this happening was 4 chances out of 1,000. So very significant to see this. So now what I've done is I added to my calculator, and you can read my articles in the American Bee Journal on how I did this. I came up to revise the growth suggestion, which has a higher lysine content than the growth does, because he did this only on adult bees. I adjusted this for the dietary needs of the nurse bees that are feeding the larvae. We're not just feeding to keep the adult bees alive, we're feeding the nurse bees so they grow more bees. So I made this calculator. I sent this out to all the manufacturers and to show them how they could improve their diets. And I thought I put in a, oh wow, okay, I gotta put in, my calculator, it shows you put in your diet components and then it calculates out, and then it shows you how much amino acid concentrates you can add, very small amounts, to perfect the amino acid balance. It doesn't cost much, so I'm hoping we're going to get much better pollen subs on the market based upon this, if the manufacturers decide to use this. Now my question now then was why, when we fed these colonies continually, we could not get them to grow. And the thing to realize is that nurse bees run the show. They decide whether they're going to cannibalize larvae or feed them. I don't know how much larva cannibalization you guys get out there during the summer with all your pollen flows, but here in California, in August, if you go out to a colony, you might see 1,000 fresh eggs in the cells at any time, but you won't see any young larvae, because the nurse bees follow behind the queen and consume and recycle those eggs as fast as the queen lays them. They are, most of them, they'll rear a little bit of brood, but they will not rear much. So it's not the queen who determines whether a colony is going to grow or not. It's the nurse bees who decide whether they're going to feed those larvae when they emerge, or whether they're going to simply cannibalize those eggs and recycle the protein. So jelly production requires a lot of protein in the diet. It also requires quite a bit of sugar coming in. Largely, it needs a lot of water. Just look how watery this is. Okay, so I think it's about 70% water, 65, 70%. So that requires a lot of water, and that is provided by incoming nectar. So the cues to the nurse bees appear to be having plenty of moisture in their guts and having a pollen placed immediately next to the brood. Let me see if I got that. So we see that band of pollen around the brood nest. That's not where most of it is placed. Most of the pollen placed by foragers comes in and is placed right next to the brood. Like when a worker emerges, they immediately fill that cell full of fresh pollen, and the nurses consume that so quickly, the beekeeper doesn't see it. What you see is the leftovers in that band around the outside. So where it's placed is really, really important. This is a study by Dow back in '74, and he's showing the number of bees going to feeding on pollen placed on the top bar, how far from the nurse bees. And what you see is you get a whole lot of them where it's only at less than ½ inch away. But boy, by the time you get to an inch away, it drops down to very few. By the time you're 2 inches away, very few nurses. Nurses respond to pollen placed immediately next to where they are, next to the brood. That's their cue to expand the brood nest. This pollen that you see over here is simply surplus. This is like when you go back to your house and open that closet where you have your pantry and all that canned food that you haven't eaten for 5 years. That's what this represents to the nurses. So yeah, we got reserve food back there in the pantry, but we're not going to eat it unless we actually have to. The pollen coming in like this pollen right here, this pollen placed immediately next to the brood, that is the stimulatory pollen right there. So my question is that why we seem to get better colony growth when we feed these both patties, where this pollen squeezes right up between the bottom bars and gets right into the middle of the brood nest? So I said, wow, I've got some data that might be able to help me answer that question. When we graded those colonies, we graded the top box and the lower box independently. And when we started the trial, so this is our beginning in August, what I'm doing, I can simply take and divide the total colony strength by the top and bottom box to show if we had 100% of the bees in the upper box, the dot would be over here. 100% of the bees would be in the lower box down here. So this is showing me both of the bees were in the lower box. So we start these colonies as singles into the box that drawn home on top of it. So we started off mostly in the lower box. We always put the patties right in the center. So where these dots are relative to this blue line shows where the cluster is relative to the patties. By the midpoint, by November, look at how many of the colonies have moved up to the upper box, but we have the patties right near the middle. At the end point in February, now this is showing the total cluster size here. So the higher the dot is, the larger the colonies grew. And notice that the colonies that had the cluster right near the middle over the patties were those that tended to grow the largest. So this is telling me, yeah, maybe where that patty is placed relative to the cluster is really important. That more in the center of the cluster and closer to the nurseries, the more stimulatory it is to the